As she said, I'm a recent college graduate. I went to Trinity College, so I'm a fellow NESCACer, which is a word I'm going to be terming. So I graduated in 2016. I was a rower there. I was an English major, environmental science, and women and gender sexuality minor, so I was pretty much all over the place there academically, which was really cool because you get to dive into all the liberal arts pieces. So I graduated in May, and I started working at Webster Bank. Moved to Boston, a little further away from Hartford. Sorry, my hair is on the mic. Sorry about that, guys. Maybe I'll put it up halfway through. So yeah, moved to Webster. Webster just started off in Boston. We just had our 1-year anniversary last week, so we're kind of brand new to the area, which is pretty cool. And it's a community bank, so it's a small bank, and that's what I'm going to kind of be getting into is my journey to asking this question: why does it matter where I put my money? So I started in banking, not because I was necessarily thought banking was where I was going to end up. It was because of my environmental background, and I researched a bank that I was really interested in that supported the same ideals that I wanted to be expressed, and that's how I got to start doing these talks like this, where I can talk about environmentalism and investing. So just a disclosure before I kind of get into this. Although I am a salesperson, this is not a sales pitch. I'm not trying to necessarily sell you to open an account with me, although I did bring cards, so afterwards, please feel free to come up to me. But no, this is not a sales pitch. I'm not trying to bring you guys to Webster necessarily. But instead, my goal kind of for this talk is to create an awareness to show you guys a place where you can really make a difference environmentally, and lastly, to kind of show you what an environmental science degree can do and kind of where it led me down my path. So the talk, like I said, is kind of going to be in 2 separate parts. I'm going to start with my journey entering into this question, and then I'm going to go into like the nitty-gritty of banking afterwards. So one question to ask: what is a deep local economy? So I have my friend here. He is also a fellow NESCACer. He's a professor at Middlebury College. His name is Bill McKibben. So I'm going way back now. I'm going back like 4 years. This book was actually written in 2007, I believe. I was given this book when I started AP Environmental Science. It was given to me by my professor, I guess teacher back then, Alice Halloran. She was awesome, a little crazy, but awesome. And we were given this book before we started the semester, and it opened my eyes to this idea of an environmentalism that I didn't really know existed. So I pretty much thought, go on bike rides more, that'll help, and like don't use plastic water bottles. But I didn't know much else beyond that, and just the more scientific pieces that you learn. But this really opened my eyes to how the community and social justice can make a difference in the environment. So even to go further than that, Bill McKibben was also a huge person who was involved with the pipeline, and this is 4 years ago. So this is when we were just starting to talk about like, oh, they're like tar sands, and they're like really bad for the environment if you try to extract things out of them. And oh, by the way, there might be a pipeline that could possibly go to the United States at one point. And then fast forward 4 years. Oh yeah, back then Alice Halloran wanted us to go to Washington and protest as 17-year-olds. And it was awesome, but we didn't do it because the school wouldn't let us. But yeah, we were so pumped up about it, and we were so excited. And then 4 years later, I moved to Boston, and I'm protesting not because of necessarily environmental issues, but because of social issues. So it's kind of interesting to see how 4 years kind of changed the environment and why it's so important to make changes now so that the future will be different. So one example, he goes into a ton of different examples in this book. And one of the examples that I really liked was he talks about radio. Because radio is a piece that we don't really think about necessarily as an environmental interest, I guess. We probably spend 10 to 30 minutes maybe on your drive. You guys don't work, but your drive to work if you were. We turn on the radio, listen to it. Like many of us don't know that most of the radio stations in the United States are owned by like 2 companies, which is insane, which is crazy. And it's super not local, and it's super just sending your money and sending your time with these people who don't know you, and they have huge companies, right? So let's talk about like local radio, right? We're all Tufts. I'm sure you guys have a local radio. Yeah? No? Maybe? Okay. So let's say you guys do have a local radio, and you tune into the local radio. A couple of you guys do, and there's a band on campus. And you guys are the Jumbos, so we'll call them the JJs. Okay, that's our campus band, right? So we tune onto the radio, and you hear it for a little bit, and you're like, okay, like I like this, I can jam to this, and then there's going to be a concert on campus, right? So you go to the concert on campus, and at the concert, the bass player is on the baseball team, bad pun, and then the singers and the a cappella groups, and then you're getting this like community, right? We're all coming together, and then you got the miscellaneous people who just happen to listen to the band and like them. So you start talking to people, you're meeting more people, and you're creating this community that's really important, right? And the money that the $10 that I guess you pay to go to the band, that's staying in the community, right? That's staying with the band or the school or whatever the money is going to, but it's staying here instead of downloading the Drake album and it goes to, I have no idea, right? So it's this idea of keeping money here because it's going to make a difference here, and it makes a difference more to you personally what the money is going on that's around you, right? So Bill McKibben's whole idea is that you're bringing a community together, you're keeping money local, and you're creating a culture. So this is a quote that I found. I thought it was pretty interesting, and this is him kind of going back away from radio and things like that. We're going, a little bit closer to banking. And it's a quote from Larry Summers. He's the former chief economist of the World Bank, former secretary of the Treasury, and former president of Harvard. And he says, there is no limit to the carrying capacity of the earth that are likely to bind any time in the foreseeable future. There isn't a risk of an apocalypse due to global warming or anything else. The idea that we should limit growth because of a small natural limit is a profound error. So sounds like a lot of like the conservative talk we hear today, right? Like I said, this book was written in 2007, and reading this now, I was kind of taken back because I was like, wow, you'd think that some opinions like this would have changed since we've had, 6, 7 years of science and this came out, but you hear a lot of things like this today. And the bigger thing that scared me was, as I was reading the book again, I couldn't believe I found this. This is awesome. I'm reading the book again, and I'm thinking about some stuff, and he's going through some politics, right, some political changes. And he brings up Reagan, and he says, Reagan convinced us that it was morning in America again. And the next line says, out with limits, in with Trump. I read that, and I was like, wow, Bill McKibben's a future teller. That's insane. Good to know. So yeah, I trust this guy. And I love reading his stuff. So he gives you kind of the background of what a deep local economy is, and we're going to build on that. Is if I know what a deep local economy is, what should I consider in my investments every day? So I lied a little bit. I am from the NESCAC. I went to College of the Holy Cross for my first 2 years though, and while I was there, I took a class called Environmental Sociology. Really cool class, very interesting. And while I was in that class, I was shown this website. It's called Better World Shopper. I encourage everyone who might be interested to log on to it. Again, it's a little bit out of date. It was published, I believe, in 2008. So you go onto the website, and it tells you the criteria of how it grades things. So we have, there's 5 things. It's human rights, the environment, animal protection, community involvement, and social justice. So those are good criteria, to base some of your things off, and that's how they grade it. So you start with A's, which we all see here, and then grades we've never seen as students. Yeah, so these are, it gives you the spectrum of what you're going to be looking at for that criteria. So when he logged on, it was interesting because I saw, cosmetics. Okay, I'll look into that. And then like grocery stores, and I was like, cool, like let's talk about Whole Foods. And then after that, it says like banks, and I was like, there's no such thing as a good bank. I was like, bank people, I'm not wearing a suit, but they wear suits and they take your money and you don't know where it goes, but you have to put your money in a bank. So it just all around is not the best thing. And I didn't think that there could be such a thing as an environmental bank. So that's what kind of like brought me to thinking like, maybe I should start doing something about this and like finding out how important banks kind of are. And so yeah, interesting site, encourage you to go onto it. I'll do a little disclaimer for Webster. This is, all the banks on top are local community banks. He was out of Colorado, so that's like kind of what those banks are. But yeah, you can kind of see the spectrum of what we're looking at. We got a lot of the larger banks down here, and then they kind of trickle down. You got the big local, or not big local banks, but small local community banks on top. So my next question was, what can I do that will actually make an impact, right? So I'm at Trinity. This is why I really want you guys to like join me in the vision, right? So I'm at Trinity, and I'm going in my senior seminar, And like I said, and I made the biggest mistake, I mean the best mistake, but the worst mistake was I chose all majors and minors that I really was in love with, not necessarily for like a career, but just because I was like, I have a passion for these things. So my senior spring actually, I was taking 3 senior seminars, which was like the worst, but again, like the best because I was studying what I liked. So I'm in my environmental science minor senior seminar, and we're reading this book. It's by Alana Mitchell. It's called Seasick. She also has a TED Talk, which will give you kind of the shortcut of what she goes through in this book. It's really interesting. As an English major, I don't think she formulates her arguments super well, but it is a really interesting book, and her science is very good. So she starts off, and she brings us into coral reefs. And coral reefs are cool because they're beautiful, and Finding Nemo, and like, you know, all the things that we know and we like, and it's easy to talk about because it's something that's somewhat relatable because we all love beautiful things. We all, you know, no one wants the coral reefs to just disappear. So yeah, she brings us into coral reefs, and you're thinking about like, okay, we don't want to lose an ecosystem, and then for the sciencier of us, we start thinking like, wow, like that's a carbon sink. You know, carbon sinks seem probably kind of important right now, especially when we're talking about CO2 all the time. You know, carbon sinks will probably be a big deal pretty soon, or like right now. And then we're talking about biodiversity, right? Like biodiversity is important. We have so many animals that are on the endangered species list, or you have a lot of animals that, you know, are already extinct. So we want to keep biodiversity as something that's important to us. So yeah, she starts with coral reefs, and then she gets into like, you know, ocean pH. That started to get a little bit scarier, right? Because I don't really know what I can do about ocean pH. I know that I cannot go to a coral reef and drive my yacht through it. I know that I won't wear the sunscreen that's going to hurt the coral reefs. I know like little things that I can do to help coral reefs, although those are too large for me. Ocean pH seems even larger, right? Like what am I supposed to do personally about coral reefs, or excuse me, about ocean pH? So that, you know, it starts to get a little scarier, and you're thinking about like, you know, these are really, really big topics. And then lastly, we got into deep sea ocean currents. And that's when I like sat back and I was like, wow, that's a big deal. Deep sea ocean currents are like what churns our ocean. So for people who haven't like studied this before, it's kind of like, you know, the water goes up to the poles and then some of it becomes ice, but the water gets a little heavier because it has more salt in it. So then it sinks down and goes right, you know, so we have this like churning motion in the ocean, which is really important. So when I'm reading this, I'm really thinking like, why isn't this like everywhere? Like, why don't we all know about this? Why is this like blaring all over every news station as something that's important? And it takes you back. So you sit there and kind of like we are right now, like you're sitting there and thinking like, what are we doing? Like, what do I personally do that is actually going to make a change? And as I'm sitting there, I know there's professors in the room, but I'm probably checking my phone a couple times, right? You know, that uses energy, and the metal in that is probably not taking it in the most socially conscious way. So, you know, that doesn't feel that good. And the window's open, and I think I can hear the air conditioner on. So I don't know, like what, you know, and the person next to me is drinking from a plastic water bottle. So like, what are we doing? We talk about all these things, but what do we actually do about it, you know? And so that's what I started thinking about, you know, what do I do? You know, what am I doing that's actually like making a change? So this one's not something we have to think about that often. Actually, going to Professor Oren's speech, talking about bug-bitten tea and coffee and things like that. We know about fair trade coffee, right? It's not that hard to find anymore, right? It's pretty much everywhere, but at least you can feel good when you see that stamp that says, I'm drinking fair trade coffee, right? It's, you know, it's just a little thing. You're making a statement with your latte. And then, you know, organic fish. I would say I probably bought fish once in college because I'm not buying fish that often. But the one time that I did, I was cooking in my house, and I had just written my paper after my senior seminar on the importance of like keeping salmon from GMOs and making sure that we can actually have natural salmon 20 years in the future. So I paid the $4 extra for the organic salmon, which as students we know that really hurts. But we do it because we care, you know. I cared, and so I poured my $4. I still remember it, and I'm still mad. And then, you know, even further, I don't necessarily drive a hybrid car. I don't have a car in Boston. But some of us go as far as to like driving hybrid cars, you know, making sure that we're cutting down on CO2, et cetera. But how are we paying for all this, right? I know that maybe some of us are, you know, maybe we keep it under our mattress, or we keep a lot of cash on us, but like, I know myself, I probably have $10 on me at all times. Or if I have any money, it's probably $10. So the rest of my money is in a bank, right? And so people start thinking, and I talk to people about this sometimes, and it's kind of funny because they say, yeah, you know, my money's in this bank, but like whatever, it just sits there. And I'm like, how do you think I get paid? No, it's not just sitting there. People use your money. When it's in a bank, it's being invested, and that's how banks grow, and that's the important thing. You're putting money in your bank because you're saying, I believe in this company. I'm putting it with you because I'm investing in you. Okay? So it's one of those things that it kind of mind-boggled me because I never thought about it like this. But if I'm willing to spend the extra 50 cents on my latte or $4 on my salmon, why am I not caring about where this money is coming from, right? So this brought me on to my next topic of, like, can a bank be good? I talked about this a little bit earlier when I was talking about the Better World Shopper. But more importantly, you know, can a bank, what makes a bank bad, right? Let's start there. And I would never talk about my competition, but I'm going to talk about my competition. It's very Googleable too, so I don't feel that bad. But these are the big four banks. Every country has, or most countries that are economically developed have their big four banks that have the most money out of their country. So these are the big four banks that we have: Bank of America, Citi, Wells Fargo, and JP Morgan Chase. So between the big four banks, they hold roughly 10.7 trillion in deposits, and roughly 45% of deposits in the U.S. totally. So they're huge, they're big. I'll talk about it later, but they probably don't care about you that much unless you're a huge corporation, right? And so I like to focus on Bank of America. I like to focus on Bank of America because I banked with Bank of America before I started doing my research when I was in college. They target students. They're everywhere where there's a college, right? When you go to orientation, who's the first person you see? The Bank of America table asking you to open a student account. Bank of America is easy to talk about because I think a lot of us, especially in the Boston area, you know, we use Bank of America. It's very ever present. And so this article was actually given to me by my boss's boss's boss when he heard that I was going to start giving speeches, which I thought was awesome that he actually cared. So it's called Bank of America's Earnings Impacted by Troubled Energy Sector. So we all remember over the last year when we were going to the pump and we were so excited because it was so cheap and it was awesome because you could, like, maybe I want to go on a road trip now because it's like $1.78 for gas, which was cool, but it was not cool for Bank of America because they're so invested in the energy sector. They have a ton of outstanding loans that go to these companies that are focused in energy, and they have $21 billion in bank loans that are tied to these companies, right? So that's a huge number. Following them is Wells Fargo with $17 billion, and then we have Shannon Stem here who tells us that with 2% of the loans tied to energy, Bank of America is among the banks that have the highest exposure to the energy sector. So it's interesting, right? Like it's not only that they're tied into it, they're one of the biggest contributors to it. So it's something to think about. It's something, is that where we want to have our money? When you're putting your money with these large banks and you look into the things that they're investing in, those are things that you're investing in. It's a nice thing to, like, think about and trickle down to because we all make a difference, right? So this is a great one. I actually had a piggy bank, but I forgot it and I wanted to hold it when I was talking, but it's okay. The name of this article is How to Divest from Fossil Fuels No Matter the Size of Your Piggy Bank. So I'm going to go back to when I was giving another talk at another university in Boston. And I actually ended up meeting with one of the head of their environmental clubs afterwards, and she said, you know, we want to divest, we want to work with you, let's set up a meeting. I was like, great, awesome, I love doing that, cool. So we sat down, and we're filling out the paperwork and stuff, and we're making sure that her organization is no longer tied with the big banks. And I started talking to her, and we're off the book now. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just talking with her. And I was like, oh, well, like, are you divested? And she starts laughing, and I was like, okay, why? Like, what's up? And she was like, well, what does my $200 do? So that's one of those things where I almost, like, pulled out my flashcards. I was like, let me tell you what your $200 does. Yeah. So it's one of those things where people don't see, like, where their small impacts make a difference. So a lot of the colleges came back to these divestment movements, right? And I know Tufts had one too, and you guys had done a lot with that. And a lot of the universities would turn around back to the students and would be like, well, are you divested? Because it's not only about necessarily the dollar amount, it's about the activism that we're doing. And you can make a huge step in activism by showing that you're invested too in the right things. It's not the sexiest form of activism. I hope we're going to see some people at the Women's March later this week. But it's not the sexiest form of activism, right? Like, this is my bank. But it's something that's really going to make a difference. And sometimes that needs to be put into the equation also. So he kind of goes into the same pieces that I do. It seems that all an individual can do for the whole divestment movement is sign a petition or participate in the next scheduled protest. What if I want to root out petroleum and investing in my own life? Could you? And so he goes pretty much to the same steps that I'm explaining to you, is that you can by going local, by finding the right bank that cares about the things that you also care about. All right, so coming to the conclusion of like the questions that we should be asking, right? So how can I find a good bank? And this is the thing that I like to stress the most. It's your money, ask the questions, right? Every banker, any bank out there, you can go in, you can come with a set of questions about the things that you care about, and you have to expect those answers because they're going to know it and it's important to you. And again, you're putting your money with them, right? So they're gonna have to give you the important information, because if you're going to put your entire savings, no matter what that is, you should be able to be educated about who you're working with. So these are the questions that I came up with. This is kind of like my little colorful blurb. So what can I do? What do I care about in a place that I invest in? So the first one is the easy one, which we always think about, right? Do you support the environment? Are you recycling? Are you going paperless? Are you LEED certified? All the questions that kind of come up to you naturally about what, the little environmental pieces are. This is key, and this is going to show you frontwardly, are they trying to make that effort to expose environmentalism to their customers? Next, do you support the community? This is actually the reason why I started with Webster. A lot of community banks have that environmental piece, but this is the piece that really got to me was how involved in the community are you? So they give us 7 hours a quarter to go out and work with the community, because they don't want us just to be in a bank. They want us to be part of the community and part of everyone. Kind of like the radio scenario I was giving you about local radio. You want to bring communities together. So I get to leave work once a week, an hour early, and just go work with the community, which is pretty cool. And a lot of people are working with schools where they do tutoring. So it's a really nice way of getting involved in the community, showing that we're not just here for a career necessarily. We're here to be part of something bigger. So yeah, how involved in the community are you? Diversity. Diversity is huge, especially in banking. Diversity is huge. Diversity of gender, diversity of color. They're pieces that might not necessarily seem environmental. It's more of a social justice issue, but it's something that's really important in banking because there's been so much attention to it. If you look into any study of, I'm more focused on Bank of America because that's what I've studied the most, but if you just Google like lawsuits against Bank of America, you're going to see a lot of this. And they're things that you really want to know about. Again, this is your investment. You want to know what exactly that you're investing in. Do you support local businesses? As again, we're trying to build this local economy, so local businesses are really important to that. Do you only care about the humongous companies that you're going to be supporting, or do you care about the little guys? Do you support them in the same way? Ask them about their small business accounts. What are you offering for small businesses? And lastly, things that are going to go more according to you guys, do you support students, right? You guys, we are, I guess I formally am, but we're the backbone of the future. So your plans for students are really important. After you get off your student plan, what kind of bank account are you going to give me? You should just know for yourself, but also it's important to understand, are you trying to be supportive? Are you going to be putting someone in an account that they're going to be successful in, or are you going to be putting someone in the account where you're going to make the most money? If I go to graduate school, if I want to become a doctor, do I also get a student plan, or will I have to be worrying about my money more? These are all questions that are really important. And one of the biggest things that I love about Westover, Westover was my high school, so I always mix up Webster and Westover. Webster, one of the really cool things that I liked about it was they don't want people to have to worry about going abroad. So for student accounts, you get like free ATMs everywhere, which is really cool. So I was like, yeah, you're right, because that's the worst when you're going abroad and you're like, what bank am I supposed to use? We don't want you to worry about that. We want you to worry about like getting your education and not having to always kind of figure out like what ATM am I supposed to be using. So do they support students? That's really important. It's going to be the important things for you on an economic level, but it's also going to be important for you when you think about like who you're trying to support. Awesome. So that's my speech today. I hope you guys got to learn a little bit. Thanks to Professor Stein for kind of introducing me to Tufts and exposing me to this entire college in general. And thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I have to admit, I've never really thought of where I bank as an investment in the bank's decision-making process. And so I guess I wonder, you've graded all these banks. We all have probably a different basis by which we would choose a set of banks for their kinds of investments. Is there a place to find out, which ones might be more supporting sustainable agriculture, for example?
Yeah,
or which
totally.
ones support students, or which ones support? So is there a house?
You mean like a website or something like that? I don't know necessarily if that is something that exists, or not at least that I know of. One of, I think, is more pertainable to you is find a bank that actually cares about what you suggest. For example, like every single survey that we send a survey to our customers every time they give not every time they give a transaction, but pretty frequently until you answer one. And we ask like, what do you want us to change and what do you care about? And so I had actually environmental science. I was working out of the BU area at one point, and a professor, an environmental science professor, filled one out and was like, I'm worried about the plants that you guys have in the front. I was like, great, I studied invasive biology, let's talk about it. So yeah, if you want to find a bank that just actually cares and is going to take your insight seriously, because once we got that, we immediately got someone not only like to clean our street front to make sure everything was better, but also to look into the type of plants that we were putting in the front. So it's important. Hope that answers your question a little bit.
A little bit. I guess I was just thinking about banks in general.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you targeted Bank of America. I happen to use Citizens,
Mm-hmm.
which got a D or something. And so I'm trying to wonder if we all wanted to investigate our banks so that we make informed choices. Is it just super easy to go to your bank website to know where they're investing my dollars? Or do they try to hide it?
It's going to be the opposite of that. They're going to say if you go on the Bank of America site right now, actually it's funny because I did find some interesting things. They have a quote that says petroleum is the bloodline of America, and I was like, thanks, Bank of America. No, so they're going to hide as much as they can. Every website is going to have some type of environmental action thing. I mean, if you go to like Exxon right now, if you go on their Facebook page, it says, we're a company that works on sustainable energy. That's what, it's not like I extract oil. It's like we're a sustainability company. Every company that's pretty much super against the environment is going to try and highlight how much they are about the environment. So I would suggest that you Google like people's experiences or maybe some lawsuits or things like that where you can kind of, if it has that low of a rating, it should be pretty easy to find where that's coming from.
One place to look, Colin, also is Amy Goodman from the show Democracy Now! Has done a series of exposés related to her reporting on the pipeline, the Standing Rock protests and the pipeline, the Dakota pipeline. And there is associated with her website for Democracy Now! There is a series of exposés about where big banks are putting their money in regards to pipelines, energy investment in general. It's not quite a rating system, but it's at least a good place to start.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff out there. You just have to look for it sometimes with banks.
Let me just ask a question first, and I'll pass the mic on. Thank you so much for a great presentation.
Of course.
I want to ask you, when you talk about diversity in terms of who works for the bank, I also wanted to encourage you in future presentations to mention what that diversity impacts are in terms of the decisions the banks make.
Totally.
Working at teaching environmental justice a lot, we spend a lot of time talking about redlining and the impacts of decisions banks make on communities.
As a women and gender sexuality study, like sometimes you just assume people know. It's even environmental science, like you just assume people know like these pieces, and sometimes you're right, it's not as obvious.
On a practical point, you mentioned ATMs at the end, and I know that one thing you want from your bank is to be able to get your money out when you want it. So as for the smaller banks, that can be a problem because you may may not be attached to all these ATMs, in which case you would do what? You would partner with
So what Webster does personally, obviously I can't speak for other banks, but what we do personally is we won't charge you for using another ATM, and if an ATM charges you, it gets registered onto your balance. We find that, and then we rebate you that money. So that's how it works. So we don't necessarily work with all of the banks in the world, but we just find out what the fee is, and then we'll rebate it to you. Yeah, it's an easy way of doing it.
Those activities seem like they would be expensive. Things like returning ATM fees and re-landscaping. How do you minimize the costs per account?
I mean, I'm on the bottom of the totem pole. I just graduated college, so I never know. I just tell the requests to the higher up, and they're really responsive about that because, again, as a community bank, we care about the community and what people think. And as a community bank, you can't do well without supporting the community. So we try and find the best solutions. I don't know price negotiations necessarily, but we just try and work to as much as we can toward helping the people who are around us.
I think I was more looking for fees per account and.
Do we charge you a ton of fees?
Right.
Oh, so for of course. So for like the student accounts, you get it free for 5 years. So you have again like all the ATMs, et cetera, and that's free for 5 years until you graduate. And then again, I think if you go, like I said, if you go to master's or whatever else, you can re-sign up for another student account for the next 5 years again. For the other accounts, it just depends on where it is. Another nice thing about Webster, another piece that I really liked is we do second chance programs. So if you were super in debt and owed some bank a ton of money, we have opportunity accounts where we will actually let you open an account, which is something that almost no banks do anymore. If you get onto the list of you're not allowed to bank anymore, you're not allowed to bank anymore. So that's another little piece. But, I would say we have some of the best accounts in the area. Especially being new to Boston, we have put so much money into this area that the accounts have really crazy cool promos. But we can definitely talk about it more in detail if that's what you're interested in.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, should I use my phone? Hi, so I kind of fall into your category. Your story is about, I'm actually someone that's worked on local divestment campaigns, actually for the city of Somerville pension fund, and so I've worked on that for years. And haven't really thought about my own money, so this is really interesting, especially since I think the biggest part about divestment is the activism piece. I don't think it's about the money piece at all. I was at a Standing Rock event a couple months ago. I bank with Citizens Bank as well, and Citizens Bank was one of the banks listed funding Standing Rock. They weren't as much of a funder, I think, as like Bank of America was huge on that list. So I was already considering of like pulling all my money out of Citizens Bank at that point just for activism on Standing Rock. But yeah, all the banks, I mean, they all seem to have some money and some. It's not just, if it's not Standing Rock, it's some pipeline or something. So, with Webster Bank, are you guys totally divested of like fossil fuel projects?
So that's the question that I've been asking too. I know that when the energy sector collapses were happening, it had no effect on on any of our money. So that's the best that they would give me. I would never as an environmentalist promise you that we have no money in the energy sector, but I know that it's so small that it literally had no effect on us during that quarters or over those quarters over the past year, which is pretty important. We were not listed on the Standing Rock piece either, so. And usually the thing with community banks, when there are those big projects that you're talking about, we don't invest in them because we're not huge. So we're not like putting billions of dollars into them like Citizens or, or Bank of America could be putting into them.
I just wanted to follow up on the topic of redlining in case there are students who are not familiar with the concept, which is the idea that banks will choose areas and say, we will not fund this neighborhood. We believe this neighborhood is because of some undesirable characteristics that we as a bank identify, which is often associated with racism, but not
Mhm.
always. We will choose not to give loans to businesses in this area. We will choose not to give loans to individuals trying to purchase houses. And it's supposed to have ended, redlining processes are supposed to have ended, but they continue to this day and continue to an ongoing problem for communities of color, even though by the law,
It's not illegal.
back
Yep.
to banking practices, it's supposed to be that individuals have equal opportunities to get access to loans. That's not actually practically the case.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you think we should, the questions we should be asking, or the things we should be looking for that would help us identify banks that are actually fighting against redlining and offering local investments for communities and making sure that we're supporting local businesses and local.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing for those is like the process that goes into like receiving loans and receiving credit cards and receiving accounts. Ask them for small businesses, like how many years of tax returns do you need? I know Webster only requires one, which is like the minimum that you need. I know that I have a lot of people who formerly had worked with Santander, and they need like 3 or 4 years to get approved for anything. We have a secured credit card. So if, again, I talked about the opportunity account a little bit. Secured credit card is when you want to build credit. If you bought a Macy's credit card when you were like 16 and then didn't touch it, and now you literally can't get a credit card because you racked up so much debt on that, even though you didn't really know it existed and your credit's awful. We have a secured credit card. So if you get, I think it's either $200 or $300, you put it with us. We hold on to that. We give you a credit card, and the limit is $300. You pay that, and you show that you can like handle having a credit card after your credit gets high enough. And for any company that sees it, it looks like just a credit card. They don't know it's a secured credit card. It looks like just a credit card. And so you're building credit through that, which is awesome. So then you can start buying cars and buying a house and things like that. So there's a lot of different programs that you can have. And I would ask those questions exactly. Do you have opportunity checking? Do you have a secured credit card? And how many years of tax returns do I need for a loan? Those are very specific things, but I do bank sometimes. Any questions, guys?
Following up on the redlining question, my question is about what is the difference between the smaller banks and the larger banks? I know that at some point it became mandatory for banks to make investments in the areas where they practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure exactly, but is that what funds some of the community development grants?
Sorry, what's the question exactly?
My question is what's the difference between the larger banks and then the smaller banks in terms of their federally mandated obligation towards investing in loans that I think fund some of the community?
Yeah, it's going to differentiate everywhere, especially because we have such different capitas. Like we're so different. Like comparatively, really small banks are not going to have the same amount of money that the big 4 banks have. So it's really going to differentiate, and it's kind of a bank-to-bank situation. So I don't know too much on that.
Okay. I guess my question was if you could like broaden up, like explain a little bit about that mandatory aspect.
Yeah, I haven't personally worked with that too much, and I don't know much about that with Webster. So yeah, but I can get back to you. I can get you information afterwards if you want. I can give you some more information on that. Okay.
Hi. So I was wondering, with choosing to bank locally, what about the versus nationally? I mean, what about the inconvenience of not being able to deposit money?
Yeah, that'll always. Well, you can always deposit checks via apps, which are really cool.
True.
Yay, digital revolution. So yeah, if you ever have a check that you need to deposit, you can always just take a picture of it and it goes to your bank. Cash deposits are a little different. That usually needs to be done, depending on what bank, but it usually has to be done at the bank that you're using. So that's one of the larger problems, if that's what you're saying, if you're not locally around. The nice thing about Webster is since we're a community bank, we're located in 3 states, which gives a little bit more of a broader area. But if, like, for say you live in California and after your 4 years at Tufts, you move back to California, that 1 year that you're gone and you still have the free account might not be as convenient for you. So you might want to switch to a bank that's closer to you. Awesome. All right, if you guys have any questions or want one of my business cards, I actually am stationed in the banking center that's closest to Tufts, which is cool because usually I'm telling people like, oh, like if you want to visit me in Porter Square. So if you guys want any information or want to come visit me, I have all my information up here. So thank you guys.